Welcome to Screenwriters Rewatch. We're here to review Good Will Hunting and to see if it deserves a place in the script department vaults. I'm joined by Marcus, who is going to give us a review.
Hi, Helen. Yes, we are here to review Good Will Hunting today, and I'm here to give you a review. I'm going to try not give everything away in this review. It's very difficult, because I like this film very much. I think that's the first thing to say. I like this film very much. It was a blind spot for me for years and years and years and years, and I only watched it for the first time probably about, I don't know, 6 months ago, something like that, and I've rewatched it today. So it's interesting. A lot of people come to this movie as kind of young. I'd like to think I am still young, but younger people, and kind of discovering film early on and things like that. Whereas I came to it as a slightly more haggard and aged individual. But I think it's a really interesting movie, and it's become so embedded in the zeitgeist. This is endlessly parodied, this movie. Like, there are so many elements of it. You see it in, Family Guy for me is the great cultural kind of oil dipper, if you like. If it gets parodied in Family Guy or The Simpsons or South Park or whatever it is, I think it's parodied in all of them. You've probably done something right. And I think that it's really I think the reason it's so embedded in the culture is because of its discussion on different classes and different things like that. There is a really interesting conversation that is going on here about different classes and how they interact with one another, which I think is really, really fascinating. The similarities, the differences, they're all explored here. Now, Will Hunting, I'm going to get into that a little bit. Will Hunting is a prodigy. He is absolutely a prodigy, and he knows he's a prodigy as well. He says a few times here, these numbers, I just know how to work them. There's a wonderful bit where he's talking about the piano, and he's saying, Beethoven could just play. I can just play. And I think there's a lovely little simple moment of dialogue. I'll come on to the dialogue in a little while, but this is what he is. He is a prodigy when it comes to maths. He's vastly intelligent, fiercely intelligent, but he is in this what I think the film would describe as a dead end job. And that's certainly the thing that we're pushing there. Now, there's an interesting thing. We'll talk about legacy maybe a little bit later and how this is aged, but I don't think that's probably not something we would say now as the idea. You can find fulfillment in any job that you have. If you are happy and you are good there, then fine. So I think there are some things that are odds there, but I think that's is an interesting starting point. But anyway, he is resistant to this idea of kind of exploring his potential because of his background, and he wants to reject this kind of what he deems as pompous and elitist, this idea of the university and everything like that. And I think this is a really interesting thing, because in that sentence there, I've said that the film would describe the janitor job as dead end, but the film also would describe a lot of the university as pompous, pretentious, and elitist. So who is this film for, is the question, because you've got this whole situation here where it is taking pot shots at everybody. It is saying you can do better than this, but it's also saying that guy is a prick and this guy is elitist, and it's saying that the university system is kind of pompous and this, that, and the other. And so I think it's an interesting thing to consider, because I think the answer to that is that it's a really interesting and honest look at people from all walks of life and the similarities and the differences. And I think the resolution and kind of the theme of this is that you just got to do what you got to do. It doesn't matter if you're a prodigy or a math prodigy or a bricklayer. You are who you are, and you just need to do what you've got to do. And I think it explores this in a really, really great and really, really interesting way. It certainly lays out this thesis, if you like, to go along with the university ideal in a number of different ways that I find really compelling. And I think that it does this by demonstrating that you have Will Hunting and you have Carl, the therapist. These two people aren't really trying to fit into a box. Jerry is trying to be the big time this, that, and the other. He's, he wants to be this amazing mathematician. He's chasing this dream. The Will's friends are trying to be kind of they've settled into their box. They don't really think they can go anywhere else. This is who they are. This is who they're going to be. The people who flourish in this movie are the people that are able to see themselves as outside of a particular box. Will moves between Sean,
Sean.
yeah, Sean
Yeah.
moves between Robin Williams moves between these boxes. He's able to rise above what society's expected of him, and be content with who he is, and choosing love over academic achievement and things like this. And I think this is kind of if there is a lesson from this film, I think that's what it is. Like, expectations can be good, but actually just be who you are. And I think it's a really interesting kind of theme that runs through this kind of coming of agey kind of tale. And I think it's explored really well. And this is the reason that I like this so well, is that that's quite a high-minded theme. It's quite it could be quite laborious. It could be kind of boring to watch. It could also be quite pretentious. But it's saved from itself, I think, by the dialogue. And this is the reason I really, really like this movie. And I think that the dialogue is, in places, it's not perfect, but in places, it's a masterclass in writing kind of naturalism and in dialogue and things like that. It's famously written by Ben Affleck and Matt Damon, who won a bunch of awards and Oscars and all this, that, and the other. And the reason that matters is because you've got two people who are writing to be characters that they are going to play from the place where they are from. And I know that the way they wrote this is by kind of sitting across the room from one another and hurling kind of dialogue at each other and doing that kind of thing. It's not always relevant how something is written, but I think on this occasion it really, really is, because you can embed yourself into the accent, in the nuance of the way these accents are kind of come across, and the way things move between one another, and the way friends interact as well. The fact that Will Hunting gets on with Sean, for example. He gets on with Sean because he speaks his language. He speaks in his way. There's this wonderful moment where he's gone through all of these therapists and everything like that, and Will's got his way with all of them, and he's made them all feel a bit stupid and this, that, and the other. And they've all taken it. They've all just left. And then suddenly Sean grabs him by the throat and pushes him up against the wall and says no, and stops him. And that he speaks his language. He speaks a language that he understands. So Will Hunting now begins to respect Sean. The point here being that there's a language, there's a dialogue, and there's a thing there that is so embedded in this movie. I don't think, which is kind of a contradiction when I say it's a masterclass in dialogue writing, I don't think you could reproduce this. I don't think that there is a way that you could, unless you are the writer and the actor. I don't think you can produce this in such a way. I also know the huge amount of this is improvised. And Helen, I know you read the script, and I think we'll probably get into it in the podcast section of this, but there are some pretty big changes from what I understand. So again, I don't know, perhaps the whole argument of this being great dialogue does kind of fall on its sword a wee bit there, because it is it doesn't really translate if it's so much of it's improvised. It doesn't really work. But what I would say is that I think this film is really, really good at the little conversations, the little character moments, and finding out who these people really are through dialogue, and also through what isn't there. And very quickly, because I'm talking too much, I'll come on to characterization. These are quite well thought out characters. I think most of these characters, even the ones in the background, tend to be pretty. There are nuances to them that are interesting. There are exceptions. There are some significant exceptions to that rule. I think that Skylar is not the most thoroughly developed character that perhaps she could and should be. She is very much there to facilitate Matt Damon's or Will Hunting's kind of growth or lack of growth throughout the film. She doesn't really have her own thing going on. But there are others. Generally speaking, there's some great characterization that's written really well, and you can feel it coming off the page. Again, you tell me. Maybe it's there in the script, maybe it isn't. We can come on to that, I think. But I think that there is some good stuff here. But really, what I want to do now, because I've like spoken way too much, is I want to ask you a question, Helen, if I can, because
Go
I've
for it.
wrestled with this a little bit. Tell me, who is the antagonist of this movie?
It's
Who's
interesting
the
you
bad
bring that
guy?
up. So I had exactly the same question for you, actually, because the
I beat you to it.
antagonistic forces are very difficult to identify. And I think the
Hmm.
reason, I put a bit of thought into this, I think the reason that it's difficult to see that is because the four main characters that are in here are two sides of the same coin. Sean and Lambo are their own protagonist antagonists. And
Hmm.
you get the same with Will and Skylar. They are just as much push and pull, and then in different combinations, Will and Lambo, Will and Sean, and then you could throw Chucky in there as well. And
Sure.
they all feed off of one another, is how I've perceived it, which to achieve that intricacy must have been a challenge if that was the aim.
Yeah.
But yeah, it works well. But there are some interesting discussion points I think we've got here.
Hmm. I think you're right. I agree with you. I think that the each character is in its own way their own antagonist
Mhm.
in different moments, and I think the role of main antagonist it is quite fluid. I think Jerry fits into that role quite well. If we were going to simplify it, I think he does. He has this kind of he's forcing Will into things, but he's doing it from a really good place. And there's I think Sean even has moments where he obviously isn't the antagonist, but he has moments where he's not doing the right thing. I think Will Hunting is often and frequently his own antagonist, and I
Oh,
think
definitely.
I think
Mm.
that would be if we were to ask them who's the antagonist. I think that's what they'd say. I think they'd say that Will is his own
Yeah.
antagonist.
But remember, antagonist doesn't have to just be a person. And I took this very
Oh no.
much that the antagonist in this was the responsibility of everybody's inheritance, if you like. I took Skylar's
Hmm.
literal inheritance and translated that. You could see the responsibility that each of these four characters have is, in a way, an antagonist for each of them, but also plays into each other when Lambo, Jerry, for example, is relaying back to Sean the importance of Will going forward with a career and how he's got to, you can't, someone with that much knowledge and intelligence and skill and natural talent, it's not right that he's just locked away. That's the responsibility that he's projecting onto Will
Hmm.
and in a way onto Sean. So I think as one antagonist, I think it comes down to the responsibility, but I think they're very good
Yeah,
at
that's
playing off
interesting.
each
Yeah.
other.
Yeah,
Mm.
and I think it speaks to the quality of the characterization, and I think and that is there and inherent within it because no one does anything that feels out of character, and
Mm.
everybody feels as though they're doing what they would be doing. They feel like very well built characters, and I do think that much of this comes down to the comes down to the writing, and I think that's why it's such an interesting film to discuss because of I wouldn't normally put so much emphasis on the way this was written, but I think that the fact that these two the protagonist and one of the other lead actors wrote this film about where they were from whilst they were there, I think is such a significant element here, and I think that I personally I think that's why this works. That's my kind of that's my quick review, I suppose, of it. I think there are some negatives, and for the sake of balance, I think that you have this whole element of Will going at these therapists. I think he is immediately less defensive when he comes to into Sean's office, and I think they could have played around with the idea of him being as defensive and as antagonistic, interestingly, as he was with the other ones, the other therapists there. I think he gets off a little bit too easy, despite the paint by numbers section. I do also think that despite the fact some of them are very beautiful. Robin Williams feels as though he's wheeled out. There's a few sequences where we don't see him, and he gets wheeled out for some kind of deep and meaningful life advice, and then goes away
Mm.
again. And you kind of go, "Oh, okay, it's a little bit on the nose." But I think that might be a '90s filmmaking thing rather than a. I think again that's probably explainable by the time it was made. Um, there are also moments where I think Will is made out to be way too smart. He's in. It's enough for him to be a naturally gifted maths genius. He doesn't also need to have read the entire works of Shakespeare and be able to quote this and that and the other. And I think he just comes across as being pretty obnoxious a lot of the time, which is the point of it. And I know it's the point of it, but I think it sometimes is. They sometimes push it a little bit too far, I think. So that I think, broadly speaking, to sum up, I think there are a million fantastic lessons that you can learn as a writer from watching this movie, including the importance of, and especially I think the importance of good dialogue and showing people, showing your audience information rather than telling your audience information. I think is a crucial element here, and I think this is a good movie for that. So that's my speedy review, Helen. I'm excited to
Fantastic.
unpack it a little bit further with you.
Yeah, join us over on the podcast where we'll be discussing it in more detail. See you then.